So today we're going to talk about faith, our topic, and we're going to look at two ways that faith can be sort of expressed in people's lives. And it's categorized, and the sources that we're going to look at are different sources. And it would be categorized as sort of, if you could divide faith into two, like maybe you could divide faith into 100, but let's say you could divide, the definition of faith, what is faith? There are really sort of two main categories of faith. So let's start with, let's say the first one, faith that. Faith that. So I want you to think for a moment, if you're prepared to share something personal. If I said to you, can you give me an example of something in your life that says, I have faith that ... What would that be? I'll give you an easy one. Okay, I'll give you an easy one. I have faith that the sun will rise tomorrow. Might not see it in Chicago, right? But I have faith that the sun will rise. Anybody?
I have faith that the seasons will change,
Faith
moving
that the
along
seasons will
with
change.
different temperatures.
So if you said, I have faith in the seasons, I have faith in the sun, that would be faith. And what would be the bigger overriding category of that those things would fall into?
Natural world.
Okay,
Nature.
so faith that the natural order, right? I have faith that the natural order, I mean, climate change may mess it up a bit, but I have faith that the natural order will mean that there are certain things that I know will happen that I can rely on. What else?
I have faith that my husband's coming home after work tonight.
Okay, so I have faith that my husband's coming home after.
Home after work. People.
Vera?
I always believe that things will change for the better.
Okay,
It kind of keeps me up every morning.
okay, I have faith that things will continue to change for the better.
Right.
Eileen?
I have faith that my grandchildren will be raised with Jewish training and values.
Very nice. So I have faith that, okay, I'm just going to ask you why do you have faith in that?
Because I have faith in my sons and my daughters-in-law.
Okay, and so let's go back to what, and I guess what I'm trying to get at is, did that just happen in a vacuum that you have faith in that?
No,
Okay.
but I only just was able to put the words together.
Okay, so maybe faith that I laid certain groundwork in something that, we'll use the nature metaphor, that planted the seeds that this next thing will happen, right? So maybe I have faith that something I did work in is going to, bear fruit. Anything else? So, some people, or we would categorize, and the examples that you gave, I wouldn't really say this. Okay, now I'm not saying this is any of our own personal beliefs, but when people say, I have faith that God, can you just think of some examples of how other people or yourself might fill that in? Let's try somebody who's not Jewish. No, I don't know. Eileen?
Okay, I have faith that God exists.
Okay, I have faith that God exists. Marcia?
I have faith that God deals in infinite complexities.
Okay, I've got that God deals in infinite complexities.
I was going to give a very, very contradictory statement. I believe that God doesn't exist.
Okay, so you have faith that God doesn't exist, right? People have faith in things. People have faith in things. When we think about faith, we talk about God, right? We think about faith, we think about religion. But people have faith. I mean, we talked about nature. Dee Dee has faith that her husband is, going to come home from work today, as opposed to not, move out of state. There are certain things that people believe, right? If you were Christian, you might have the belief that faith that God will save you.
Yeah.
That there are things that people have faith that they believe certain things, and we usually, in religious terms, call those things dogma, right? Tenets of a religion that people believe that certain things are true. I believe in perfect faith we'll see this in a moment, of the coming of the Messiah, right? I believe that there are certain things that God said that God would do and God would do, or, faith that that all of this stuff isn't true. But some texts that we have and some philosophy that we have juxtaposes faith that, the things that I believe to be true, versus faith in. I have faith in. So can you think of some examples that you have faith in, and how is that different from faith that?
Well, I think
Yeah.
that you have faith in people.
Okay, so that's we're going to see Buber. Faith in tends to be in a relationship, right? Faith that is a list of beliefs that you may believe, where faith in is usually invested in a relationship. So this is kind of a bold thing to say, but I have faith in my husband, not that he's going to come home today. Assume he's going to come home today, but let's say I have faith in my husband that he's going to be monogamous. Why do I have that faith? Because I know he loves me, because everything that he's done up until this point in our relationship, I trust, and therefore I feel like I can rely on that. So faith in is usually based on something to do with a relationship and something to do with trust in a relationship that allows you to feel that you perhaps have evidence to support why you should have faith in somebody. Anybody ever lose faith in anybody? It could be, it could be, and we're not going to talk about spouses, but faith in a different kind. Have you ever lost faith in a different kind of relationship that isn't your spouse, Vera?
I believe in connection with Jewish people.
Okay, so
I believe,
okay.
and I believe that we are going to survive everything
Okay.
as we did for so many years, because I have a precedence of this.
Okay, so you have evidence in the survival of Jewish people over these thousands of years to this point,
Right.
to make you have faith in the fact that, or that you believe to be a fact, that we are going to be able to continue in spite of all of the challenges, in spite of whatever else happens, faith in the evidence that you've seen to date that allows you to believe and have faith in the Jewish people. Judy?
I see it also like a process, like I have faith in a process, think something that's gone on in the past and it will continue, and you start from a place, you're going to end in a certain place. So I have faith like in the process of the Cantor Search Committee, that the process that they go through is going to come through on the other end with a Cantor that's going to fit in our community.
I'm guessing that some of that faith in is based on the fact that you know some of these people, you trust some of these people, not that you know who they are yet, but when you do, that you'll say, oh, I know these people, I trust these people, I trust, the Jeff, well, those of you that know Jeff Bleiweiss, I trust him, I trust the rabbi, I trust in the process. But a lot of that is based on the fact, I think, I mean, I'm being bold and speaking for you, but that is based on the fact that I know most of the people that are involved, or I know some of the people involved, and the people that I know, like Jeff, I trust to help make good decisions about who else is involved. It's interesting because I would say I have faith in everything that I know about our community and our ability to have a good process. I'm also called on to have faith that there's a good candidate out there. And that I don't know, right? That I don't know because I have no evidence. I don't know who the people are. We haven't gotten any, we haven't even posted the job yet. So it's an interesting, it's funny because you know, depending on what day it is, I have different feelings about the whole thing. I mean, I'm a little nervous about it. And speaking of monogamous relationships, you probably heard me say, I may have said it last week, that other than my husband, my longest monogamous relationship is with the cantor. He's been my only cantor my entire career. I've worked with no other cantor. And we work really well together, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not always true. Some rabbi cantor relationships are fraught. So there's a lot of unknown, right? There's a lot of unknown. So I have faith in the process of everybody that I trust at Am Yisrael, and I'm called upon to have faith that the right candidate is out there for us. Elise?
From my perspective, it seems to me that faith involves an actor doing something. Whereas faith that does not involve someone taking action. And that someone might be human, but it also might be God. And it also could be faith that something bad will happen. Right? I mean, I have faith that Donald Trump will continue to lie, for instance.
Right. You got to, right. I
mean, I have faith in him that he's a liar, right?
Right.
Please don't.
Right. Listen, we had people.
Sorry, I don't mean to start.
Yeah, it's okay. We had people over for dinner Friday night. We're fretting about the Israeli election and we're fretting about the midterm elections. And somebody said, and we really have to worry about Brazil. And I was like, I am just at my limit to think about Brazil. So luckily things actually turned out well in Brazil. But then I thought about, maybe the election in Brazil is actually the most important election because the future of the planet and climate change and the rainforest and the Amazon maybe is more important than anything else. So, all right, check that for now, worry off the list. So Dan said to me, he's not pro-Israel. And I'm like, I do understand he's not pro-Israel. I'm not so worried because it's Brazil about that factor and that versus the fact that at least he, in theory, made a commitment to dealing with the environment and climate change. And it's Brazil, so whatever. But I'm kind of at my limit about, well, it's an interesting faith in and faith that. I would say my entire life I had faith in American democracy. And that's being shaken now in a way that I never, ever would have anticipated, I think like many of us, just a very short time ago. My whole life I heard, well, democracy's fragile, but I didn't believe it, I didn't believe it. And now that when you see the fragility of it, here, of all places where I would have never expected it, faith that it will continue is, maybe perhaps a faith in, that could be that, or so sometimes that or in can be blurry. But I think what happens a lot, and we're going to look at some sources, that when we talk about God, we mix and match faith in and faith that, and that's sometimes sort of what messes us up. Because because there's a variety of religious and spiritual relationships. There may be people that believe that God exists and maybe even feel that they have a relationship with God, but don't believe necessarily in the dogma that would have been taught through traditional Judaism. And that's where, so it's like, well, I believe this, but I don't believe that. Does that make me a good Jew or a bad Jew? Which I think is not a worthwhile conversation to have. So let's look at some sources. And part of it, I would say that also part of what happens in the Torah is there's a very specific kind of faith that's usually expressed in the Torah, or we understand from the Torah. And it's sometimes hard to sort of focus on that Torah theology and Jewish theology are not one and the same. Jewish theology has grown and developed over thousands of years. So we believe certain things perhaps about the Torah, but our theology didn't stop, 3,000 years ago. Vera.
I just want to expand a little bit on my provocative statement that I believe that God doesn't exist. My problem is that I cannot put together, where is God taking away back and when God acts? So to me, it's a totally inconsistent, and maybe because of my upbringing or my logic that I'm kind of scientist, I don't understand that. And it makes me doubt it.
Okay. I can't, I said this, I don't remember, Debbie won't remember. She was at both classes last week. I'm like, oh, I can't say the same jokes over and over. But I don't remember if I said this in the morning class or the evening class.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the things that I gave as an example is when Mother Teresa died, they published her diaries. Did I say this to you guys? I don't remember. Anyways, they published her diaries. And in her diaries, she expresses a lot of doubt in God. And Catholics were shocked. Mother Teresa ever had doubts? And I actually gave a sermon about it because I thought, I don't think any Jewish person would even be in the least little bit, it would even faze us. Mother Teresa saw the worst of the worst. She saw the worst suffering. She saw the worst of humanity. How could anybody live in the slums of Calcutta day in and day out and see the human suffering that she saw and never ask the question either, where is God or does God exist? How could you I think you'd have to have a lobotomy to be a person that always had faith, seeing what she saw. And I always extrapolate that to the Jewish experience. The idea that, Jews, I don't know how we could, given our history, be Pollyannish about, about the ability for human beings and their capacity for evil and all of those things. I think where we get caught up is that we have a Torah that talks all about God acting in the world. And so it raises this expectation that we should have this is God. The God that we're introduced to in the Torah is a God that acts in the world. Why doesn't God act in the world now? And if God doesn't act in the world now, one of the logical conclusions is because there is no God. Debbie?
There's also that feeling that's always out there where there's a reason.
Right.
We may not see it
right.
now, but maybe for the bigger picture, there's a reason. Right. It's hard to imagine.
Right. Right.
But
look, it's hard to, it's impossible to imagine that somewhere there's going to be an explanation for the Holocaust and we're going to go, oh, now I get it. Right. Other than human beings were created with free will and human beings. Listen, we talked about faith in God. Anybody see the movie The Quarrel? I think we showed it many years ago at the synagogue. It's probably the best Jewish movie that was ever made. It's based on a Yiddish story. And in it, there are two characters. They both lived together in, I think, Vilna before the war. They were both yeshiva students in Vilna before the war. One of them leaves yeshiva, becomes secular. The other one stays Orthodox. The Holocaust comes. They live through the Holocaust. They both survive. They lose everybody. They both survive. And they randomly meet on the streets of Montreal, I want to say on Yom Kippur in the late 40s. And the whole movie is a conversation that the two of them have together about these big questions of faith. The one who remains Orthodox maintains his faith in God, but living through Auschwitz and losing his family, totally loses his faith in human beings. The one, it's obviously there's a little, it's a little neater than you'd like. The one who becomes the secular Yiddish poet, who was already doubting God before the Holocaust, has no real faith in God, but never loses his faith in human beings. And so the question is, we talk about faith in God, but there's also a question of why we have faith yeah, and I think it changes, do we have faith in humanity? Do we have faith? Dara Horn said something so chilling. We're going to look at sources in a minute about Anne Frank. And this was I think in some ways, the most thought-provoking thing in the entire book. Everybody, especially non-Jewish people, love Anne Frank. I believe, that people are good, right? I believe that people are good. And she claims, why do people love that? Because everybody wants to believe, and looking at they want to believe they're good. I believe that really at the end of the day, people are good. It lets everybody lets humanity off the hook. And she says, maybe she would have written something very differently 3 weeks later when she ended up in Auschwitz, and for the first real time in her life, met people that were really, truly evil. We'll never know, right? We'll never know. She died not long after she wrote that. So that's also an open question. All right, let's look at some sources. So first we're going to look, we're going back to Abraham, right? Last week we talked about Abraham, Lech Lecha, the faith in him to leave his land and to go to wherever it was that God was going to show him. So after these things, the word of God came to Avram in a vision saying, "Fear not, Avram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be exceedingly great." And Abraham said, "Oh God, what will you give me, seeing I remain childless? And Eliezer of Damascus, that's his servant, shall possess my house." Right? In other words, remember in Lech Lecha, God says, "I will make of you a great nation, and I'll bless those that bless you. I'm going to make you a great nation." And Abraham sets out on this journey and does exactly what God asks him to do. And then God says to him again, "Your reward shall be great." And Abraham now, he's in the land and says, it's a little question. I have a little question for you. Where is this reward? Right? You're telling me that I'm going to be great. You're telling me that I have offspring. Have you noticed that I don't have any children? "Behold, you've not given me offspring, and one born in my house shall be my heir. Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This man, the servant, shall not be your heir, but one that shall come from you will be your heir." And God brought him outside and said, "Look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you're able to count them." God said to him, "So shall be your offspring." And he believed in the Lord, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. And God said to him, "I am the Lord that brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it." And he said, "O Lord, how shall I know that I'm going to inherit it?" So what do we see in this text about Abraham's faith? Debbie?
He's finally wondering what's in it for me.
It was conditional.
Okay. I mean, let's remember, he followed God's command. Lech Lecha, he left, he went not knowing where he was going. So that was an incredible act of faith. I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with conditional, right? But this faith that he has, now God makes him the promise again, a second time. And what does he want to know?
Where's my kid already?
Okay, he's not saying, I guess I wouldn't, Jacob, it says with God, if then, right? Jacob's is more conditional. Abraham's not saying, if you don't, I'm going back unless you tell me there's a kid, right? Like he's not rejecting the relationship, but he's got some questions about the relationship, right? Meaning, God, you made some commitments here, and have you noticed that you haven't kept them? Which is an interesting, I think, when we're trying to understand who is this Abraham character that's chosen, where we know nothing about him. We're told he's a man of great faith. We saw last week that he is a man of great faith. He has faith that, or faith in, maybe either or both, because they can overlap to a certain extent, but not so much so that he doesn't want to, ask God about the promises that God made. So what do you think about that in regards to how we then look at faith?
I guess I have a problem with believing text in general. I remember when I was in college and I took a course, Jewish responses to Christianity, and it was basically how so much of Judaism was like sort of rewritten based on what was okay to worship and not worship, and not getting killed, not getting in trouble. And it's in Judaism, it just seems like such a different faith than Christianity, where you believe like the exact word. Like someone said to me, how can you think that you're going to heaven or something good's going to happen after life, because it says right here in the Bible that blah blah blah, that Jews, if you don't go through Jesus, there's no way to have something good happen afterwards. And I thought, well, if you don't believe in that text, then you don't have that problem. But and I remember my Hebrew school teacher growing up always said the thing about Judaism is you can question, like you are supposed to question, and that's what makes Judaism sort of special in a way. And I always remember that. And I was like 8 years old. I didn't quite understand what that meant, but it felt good. Like I can question and I can still be Jewish. So.
Yeah, I mean, I in the movie The Chosen, if you remember this part of it where he's trying to, he's raised ultra Orthodox, Danny Sanders, and he wants to study psychiatry, right? Or psychoanalysis, whatever. And he's trying to read Freud, and he's having a hard time understanding it. And then he says, if I do it like you do Talmud, right? Where you look at all of the different commentaries and they help you understand what you're reading. And that's what he does, right? He applies now, I don't know if that's true, right? I haven't read Freud, so I don't know if it's literally true that you could do that. But the idea is Jews don't read the Bible and say, this is what Judaism is, or this is what Judaism means. I've been doing this a lot because we just started the, Bereshit and the creation of the world. And I just did some stuff with the teens on it, which is when we study the story of creation, what I start by asking is, what is it that the Torah wants us to know about this story? Right? Not what does science want us to know? What is it that we, you may believe it or you may not believe it, but what is it that the Torah wants us to know? So I would say in these same verses about Abraham, what does the Torah, if the Torah is coming to tell us anything about Abraham's faith in this little teeny story, because we've got Sodom and Gomorrah, and we've got the binding of Isaac, we've got the big dramatic stories. But this story, which is sort of read between the other big stories, what does the Torah want us to know about Abraham's faith? Because it tells us two things. First one, in a covenantal relationship, there's a deal on both ends. Now, I don't know how you hold God to the deal, right? Like that's the problem. But in a covenantal relationship, if I have faith in you and you have faith in me, we hold each other accountable. Now, every, a marriage isn't necessarily a metaphor for a relationship with God, and a friendship isn't. But if you think about any relationship that you have, it could be if you were married, it could be with somebody else that you love, there are certain expectations. Let's say in a friendship, right? Let's say you have a friendship and you talk to each other on a regular basis, and I call you and you call me. And then all of a sudden I notice you're not calling me anymore. And the only time, has ever happened to anybody? And the only time we talk is when I call you. Has that ever happened to anybody?
Oh, yes.
So what happens, right? You have a couple choices. You can say, you know what, I'm going to talk to you about it because I don't understand what's happening. And maybe you get a satisfactory answer, or maybe you don't. You can say, I'm going to let this friendship go because I don't want it to be so one-sided. Or you could say, I love this person enough that I'm going to keep calling them even if they don't call me. Like, you have choices, right? There's not one obvious path to take. But when you have a relationship where it's expected to have some sort of mutuality, when the other person stops doing those things, it undermines the relationship. So now I'm not saying that in our lives, we can say to God, listen, we have a deal and you haven't lived up to your responsibility. Like, good luck. I hope that works, whatever, right? But what the Torah is trying to tell us, what the Torah's worldview is that because Abraham and God have a relationship, Abraham has the ability to say to God, you're not holding up your end of the deal. Like, nicely, politely, right? You're not, I held up my end of the deal. I got here, but you're not holding up your end of the deal. And God reassures him, no, you're going to have a child. And Abraham then believes. Now, maybe if God, reassured you, told you that, and then it actually happened, we would have a different kind of faith. I'd like to also suggest that we're not all, as disappointing as this is, we're not all Abrahams. But what the Torah wants us to know is the idea that, that God has expectations, but we're also allowed to have expectations, and we're also allowed to ask questions. Anybody else have anything they want to say before we look at a different text? Okay. So we're now going to look at, we're not going to go through all the Hebrew, and we're frankly not even going to go through all of the English. But this is something that is written by Maimonides, and who was a sort of medieval Spanish rabbi, philosopher, scholar. We met him last week. He was the one that went through the lengthy explanation of Abraham, questioning, right? Questioning the world, questioning everything, and coming to God through being rational. And one could actually make the argument that this is kind of the opposite of that. But this is a statement, 13, they're called 13 Principles of Faith, that are Maimonides' statement is that this is what Jews need to believe. And so if you see, he starts every one with, I believe, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shlema, I believe with perfect faith. So, I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed, is the creator and leader of every created being, and God self-made, does make, and will make everything, right? So taken from the creation story, the very first thing is, I believe that there's one God who created everything, who's the creator of the world. And then some of this goes off into different philosophical things, but look at number 8. I believe with perfect faith that the entire Torah that we have in our possession is the same that was given to Moses basically on Sinai, right? So the Torah as we have it, word from word, came from God, was given to Moses, and that's what we have. I believe, number 12, with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and although the Messiah may tarry, even so I will wait every day for his coming. 13, I believe in the revival of the dead, in Mechayeh HaMetim, that the dead will be resurrected in the world to come. So how does this differ, or is this faith that or faith in, would you say? Vera?
You know what? I have a problem immediately with the first statement. Because what it says that we believe, or we should believe, that God did, is doing, and will do it ever and ever, okay? Forever and ever. And then what am I here for?
Okay.
If God will do everything, and I just have to, have an expectation of that and believe in that, then I don't see my role in the world.
Okay, so this is what I used to have a professor that would ask a question, and if nobody answered it the way he wanted to, he's like, I clearly did not ask the question in the right way to engender the response that I want. Because we're not studying the text to say, do we all believe in the coming of the Messiah? Do we all believe that God created? We're looking at what kind of a text is this? What is this? Vera or
No. I just, I
David,
think now
I
I
see you on
understand.
camera. I
I
see you on
did not
camera. Are you coming
understand.
to respond to this question? But you're muted. You're muted. David, you're muted. Muted.
I have thoughts, but I'll let others respond. I mean, I'm just interested and I do have comments in a bit.
Okay.
It's,
We talked about Judaism having faith in and the idea that something can be relational. What is this text, which is different than the other texts that we've looked at? I believe fully. Said over and over and over. Marcia?
One side of a contract.
Right. This is dogma, right? This is dogma. This is a set of religious beliefs that, according to Maimonides, every Jew must believe all 13 of these things. The fact that you don't know what they are, and you maybe never heard of this text, probably says something about Judaism and dogma, right? Probably says something about it because you may have never heard of this before. But the great Maimonides, the one that said last week that Abraham's greatness is that through his intellect, he came to believe in God. And I think that Maimonides would say, through my intellect, I came to believe all of these things. But there are different times in Jewish history that emphasize different things. And Maimonides, who's the great rationalist, like, in order to be Jewish, this is what you need to believe. And here they are. These are the bare minimum 13. And if you don't believe them, there's a problem. We tend to not look at Jewish faith like that. Certainly not in modern times, right? And certainly in modern times, we don't believe that. I mean, let's say, what do you have to believe to define yourself as a Christian? In order to say, I am a Christian, what do you have to believe? Elise?
You have to believe that Jesus is God and that Jesus saves people by granting them life in heaven, or granting them a good afterlife if they believe.
If you don't believe that, you are not a Christian, right? Have you ever had somebody to say to you, well, I was born Catholic or I was born a Christian?
Yeah.
Like nobody, I mean, there are people that say I was born Jewish. I mean, they are, but in Judaism, like it's like the Hotel California, you can check out, but you can never leave, right? You're Jewish no matter what you believe, you're Jewish in spite of what Maimonides tries to tell us. That's it. But Christianity is not like that. Other religions that have dogma, you either believe, if you believe it, you are that. And if you don't believe that, you're lapsed or you're fallen or you're a former. I've shared this with you before, but there's a woman, one of my many my estheticians that I go to for a host of other things. So there's this woman that I go to for certain things in McHenry County. I go very rarely because it's a schlep and a half. But I love talking to her because she likes talking to me, and she used to be a Christian. And I love talking, used to as in like 5 years ago. And I love talking to her about like, what does that mean for her that she used to be a Christian? Because she's a very deeply spiritual person. I think she kind of still believes she has a relationship with Jesus, but I'm not 100% sure. But she says, I used to have all the answers, and now all I have are questions. And so I don't know, like I believe, I don't know who or what Jesus is or was or is to me or is in the world. And so therefore I'm not a Christian. And it's such a fascinating conversation to me because it's as Susan pointed out, there's a very different, we talk about, Judeo-Christian traditions, but they're very, very different. Having said all of that, it's not like dogma has never come in to Judaism. And sometimes it's very affected by the times that Jews, it's always affected by the time that Jews are living in, by what they see sort of in the outside world, and that affects them, and it affects how they think of things. Like you can't, it seeps in. Debbie?
Okay. I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
I wasn't going
one-
to say anything, just in case.
one of the things about Christianity that has always struck me is it's just so easy to say, God will take care of it, whatever's meant to be, it's all taken care of. And this person in the past few years has had some family health things. And I think when things are happening, even if it's a little bit bad, you can say, oh, God will take care of it. It always just seems so simple,
Right.
the heat's off.
Right.
But when something really bad happens, I would imagine that it would shake your belief.
Right. So it's, so I feel like, like everything, Dan sometimes, will say about you, oh my God, it says everything and its opposite, which is probably true of a 3,000-year-old plus tradition where everybody's allowed to question and add their voices. So it does say everything and its opposite. It does, we say all the time, in Judaism, belief is secondary to practice, right? What we're supposed to do, not about what we're supposed to necessarily think. And then Maimonides comes to say, not so fast. Not so fast. One of them, I believe in the Messiah, right? It's actually been put to music. We sing it on Yom Kippur, right? Ani ma'amin, ani. I'm not trying to be the next cantor. Ma'amin, right? I believe in perfect faith of the coming of the Messiah, even though even though he tarries. And which should also remind us of the poem. I don't know if it was even in a poem, right? I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining, right? From the Holocaust. Which is taken off of that, right? I believe in certain things to be true, even when they're not true. All right, let's look at David. Yes.
I also go to that girl in Henry County. She does my highlights.
Well, she does a great job.
Yeah. And from what I know, which is very minimal, about Maimonides, and a good kind of secondary source on Maimonides and on this issue is probably a book that went into your curriculum there, Rabbi, is this Menachem Kellner, who's at the University of Haifa, who talks a lot about belief in and belief that. And it's Maimonides is difficult to read, very difficult to read. I mean, I read it a little, and it's hard to get at.
Right. Yeah.
And even in the secondary source, but historically, these 13 articles of faith were not considered a major part of Maimonides' work. In his own time, they weren't considered. It was very kind of like a footnote, kind of a side issue. And if it were not incorporated into Yigdal, which is done traditionally in many synagogues on Friday night, people wouldn't know. It would be okay that people didn't know about it.
That he even spent his time.
In a synagogue where you do Yigdal, then hell's bells, you should know it. But if not.
Right. Okay. So we're not going to ask with a show of hands. I'm so glad you said this, but we're not going to show with a show of hands because it's not. We don't do Yigdal on Friday nights.
Oh, who says we should do Yigdal on Friday night?
But when do we do Yigdal at the synagogue?
On Yontif, at the end of Yontif, and Friday night.
Known as the song that the cantor's son and nephew sing together. This is so important. You said this, David. Guess what Yigdal is based on? Maimonides' 13 articles of faith. It is that list that we just saw basically put to music. So you should know, even though, and the question is, we're not going to ask this now, like, why did Maimonides even waste his time writing this? But it becomes part of our liturgy. Traditionally, it's sung every Friday night. And we do it on Rosh Hashanah. And you all know it. You just didn't know that you know it. Now you know it. Now you're going to be like, so next year on Rosh Hashanah, I want you to think when it's sung, like, do I believe in the coming of the Messiah, even though he tarries? I got to really think about that a little bit more, right? But the fact is it's there. And that's the thing about, as I said about Dan, Judaism has everything in its opposite. Because as David said, this wasn't maybe considered important at all. And yet it is considered important. And yet it's not considered like there's no checklist, right? Even there's no checklist that like, okay, you're about, you know, Orthodoxy, you're about to celebrate your bar mitzvah. And before you do, I'm going to give you a checklist to make sure that you believe all of these things. But there is an expectation, right, of practice. And that's what makes Judaism really, you know, different than Christianity, not very, probably very different than Islam, right? There's an expectation of there are certain things that you do. Of course, today we live in a Jewish world where a lot of people don't do any of those things. So it all sort of, you know, breaks down. And we're gonna look at one more source before we end today. Yes, David, I cut you off. So David first, and then Vera.
Also,
I'm
you
sorry.
know,
Let David go first because I cut him off.
much of what's in, you know, these Maimonides 13 articles of faith are incorporated in standard liturgy.
Yeah.
When we say, you know, in the Amidah 3 times a day, Umevi Goel, Livnei V'neihem, God is the one who will bring a redeemer.
Right.
So you know, it's the codification of it, and it's the systemization of it, and it's almost just sort of the grammar of it and the choice of wording of it. And I think this is something perhaps Susan McClanahan, who I've never met, but it was wonderful. You know, it's somewhat of a response to a Christian system that has systematic dogma, and it's sort of like taking our non-dogmatic religions and kind of putting it in their vocabulary or in their sort of sentence structure.
Right. But to say that we believe that God is the creator of the world is a very Jewish statement. We certainly don't believe there's pagan gods that are the creators of, you know, yes, Jews believe that God, I mean, traditionally, right? Jews believe that God created the world and our God is responsible for creating everything. We just read it in Bereshit. It's not a radical statement.
And I don't know if Maimonides, well, I don't know what however it was used with consequence. That is, you know, how, you know, if a person said, well, I got a problem with number 9 of 13, you know, were they banished or anything like that? I don't, you know, historically, you know, we know about perhaps this instance or that. So, I mean, ultimately it's, well, it's just not that important. I mean, that, you know, and if it weren't in Yigdal, which in many communities is done all the time.
Right.
I mean, it's in the Siddur every morning,
Right.
you know. I mean, if it weren't sustained liturgy, again, I don't know how consequential it is. Okay, I'm muting myself. How about that?
Vera.
I just a quick question. Don't we have a checklist which is 613 mitzvot?
Okay, so first of all, there isn't even consensus on what those 613 mitzvot are. We're told that traditionally the Torah has 613 mitzvot. It's hard to find the definitive list. And there are some of those mitzvot that can only be practiced in the land of Israel. So there's no real assumption that everybody could ever do all of them.
But we have
And also
checklists.
some of them are part of the sacrificial system, which no longer exists. So there are all kinds of ways that we try to traditionally, not we, but try to categorize Jewish law. But this is sort of different than that. Like, I don't know if you know people like this, but I certainly know people like this who are very, very scrupulous in their Jewish observance and don't believe in God. I know a lot of people like that, right? Like it's, you know, so I want to look at one last thing, which is a poem. I'm kind of on a poem theme. Because the question is, you know, faith in, right? And faith in God is a very amorphous thing. And one of the things that in trying to teach faith in God to children, which I don't really spend a lot of time doing, but one of the things that they used to say that you could do with children, like your own children, which is, do you know that I love you? Hopefully, if they're young enough, they will say, yes, they do. And then you say to them, touch my love. Right? Well, so maybe they'll point you, touch my love.
Oh,
don't do this as an educator. You can only do this with your own children. You know, and if it depends on, maybe they'll touch their heart or their head or whatever. But the idea is that we do have the capacity to feel and experience things that we can't actually touch. And that ultimately faith in, if you believe in God, that faith in God has some aspect of knowing that you are never going to really, it could be like we talked about last week, it could be a fleeting experience, something that happens in your life that makes you feel something, but it's never going to be. I mean, the thing about Maimonides and his dogma and this list is it makes it feel like it could be very concrete. And yet it is the ultimate not concrete, right? It's what he believes fully without ever being able to say, because I, especially to say, I believe in the Messiah will come. I believe that this thing that will happen, even though I have no evidence to build on that this will ever happen. So I just want to share you one thing about faith that sort of brings these two together, faith that and faith in. And it's a poem by an Israeli poet by the name of Zelda. She lived in the earliest 20th century. She only has one name. Before Madonna, there was Zelda. I actually don't even at the moment remember what her last name was. She was Orthodox. She was an Orthodox woman. So it made her unusual in that she was a woman and in that she was Orthodox. It made her unusual in the canon of these sort of or pre-war, post-war Israeli secular poets who had grown up, some of them religious, and left religion behind. So she was an interesting figure. Probably her most famous poem that some of you may, if you knew any poem of hers, it would be that everyone has a name, the name given to you when you're born and through God and through your actions. And anyways, if you don't know it, don't feel badly about it. But this is a poem that she wrote about how she feels about faith. I shall not float unreined in space, lest a cloud swallow the thin band in my heart that separates good from evil. I have no existence without the lightning and thunder that I heard at Sinai. Just give you a second to look at that before I take it off the screen. So what is faith to Zelda in this poem? Danny, I see lips moving, but your mute's on.
Well, it's the Torah
It's the right. It's the Torah, and what about the Torah?
that it contains an outline for how to live.
And so the Torah, okay, the Torah and the outline for how to live. Marcia.
It's structure.
It's structure.
Mhm.
Vera.
And this is funny because I believe in this like more than in anything else, that we all met at Sinai. I feel it's so strong and so beautiful. And that's how is this belief in Jewish people. We're all connected, that we're all here, and we're all, part of one family. And it doesn't matter what you believe or don't believe. And I don't think about Orthodox or conservative or Reform in any different way in this matter. We were all there.
So we're told, right, that Torah was given on Sinai. That's one of Maimonides' basic tenets, right? The Torah was given on Sinai. And if you read the description in the Torah, there's thunder and there's lightning and they're all on the foot of the mountain. And she says, without that, basically my existence has no meaning, right? That foundational. Now it's funny because it's not funny. I think for her, she means it as a faith statement that God gave the Torah on Sinai and everything else in her existence comes from that. But I love what Vera said, because if you really pushed me, do I literally think, that's what happened at Mount Sinai? My answer would be, I don't know. And yet it rings really meaningful to me that without that feeling, that belief, whether it's in God gave the Torah on Sinai, or it's whether we as the Jewish people were all there, or whether it's a metaphor that we were all there, but we still have the same Torah, that that's for her the definition of what gives her life and her existence meaning is that faith that something happened there and it reaches through all of the generations to her. And that to me, that's a very powerful statement of faith. Elise?
This is maybe in a little bit different direction, but, and not having the text in front of me right now.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I know you can't do the two ways. You can't see us and that text at the same time. But what I was really struck by the most was the description of the band in the heart differentiating good and evil. And I think what she's saying in the poem is that what was given at Sinai, the Torah, is what creates the difference in her life. That without the Torah, she wouldn't know, right? It's not that she has faith of where the Torah came from. It's not that somebody else does or doesn't have the same definition. It's that for her, the way it gives her a way to look at the world and distinguish between good and evil, and it's eating from the tree of knowledge. Which I was just really, really struck by that, because, you know, we just looked at the creation story, right? We just looked at that, and whether Eve was wrong to get that knowledge, right? Because that's what she did, right? She went and she got that knowledge, and here is Zelda saying, I need that knowledge, and I got it from God.
And the only thing, that thin band, right? That thin band that separates good from evil, right? And there is I don't think there's any greater challenge to faith than evil in the world. Whether it's evil because your village was destroyed in an earthquake, or it was evil because they came and massacred your people, or whether it was evil because it's domestic violence, like no matter how close or how, there's no greater challenge to faith than evil and suffering.
And
And yet she's saying it's only this Torah, and it's so, and in me, she's saying it's just the narrowest band that separates my ability to do good or evil. And it's only the Torah that that pushes me on that side of morality. Danny?
You know, this discussion brings to mind two of my favorite things that my father, Alav Hashalom, used to say. One was that there is good and bad in everyone, and it's our job to find the good. And just like this poem was saying, it's a thin line, but everybody has both. The other thing that he used to say was that it doesn't matter if you believe in God, which of course would make the whole congregation go, well, what, Rabbi? And then he would say, yeah, because he's there, whether you believe in him or not. But I think I took it to mean that faith in human beings is paramount.
Yes, right.
Faith in God comes next.
Right. So we will continue, where I said nobody's going to come out of this. I'll tell you, I'll end with one story. When I was a brand new young rabbi, we did this whole unit on God. That's another curriculum that was prepared by probably the Board of Jewish Education. And so one of the things that you had to do was you had to have Play-Doh, right? And you had to show what were you and what was God, right? In the Play-Doh. So of course the assumption is, God's going to be the big piece of Play-Doh and you're going to be the little piece of Play-Doh. And one young woman in the class did it the exact opposite. God was very little and she was very big, and was like, well, what do you mean about this? And she's like, because I'm very big and central in my own life, and God's not that important. And I thought, oh, this is the most honest child. It's wonderful teaching teenagers because they're very honest. But for everybody, how that Play-Doh is going to look, is going to be different for everybody, and depending on how much time you spend thinking about these things, or no time thinking about them, or you don't believe that God exists. Like, everybody's going to have a different Play-Doh ratio. All right, I will see you all soon. Let's go enjoy this weather a little bit.
But Rabbi, I just want to thank you for one example that you gave, because it's really kind of grabbed me about love. You can't touch it,
Right.
but you do believe in love. And
Yeah.
that's, to me, was a perfect
Oh,
response to my whatever.
okay. Listen, I learned that from somebody else, but when we talk about faith in, all human beings have faith in something that we can't see, touch, or feel. And until experience proves otherwise, right? Until experience proves otherwise. All right, I'll see you all soon. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.
Enjoy the weather.
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you. You too.